Hi there, and welcome to Plant CEO. In today's episode, I'd like to welcome Victoria Moran, the founder and CEO of Main Street Vegan. Hi, Victoria. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you on the show, and especially with all your years of experience in veganism, I think you bring a lot of light and experience that we can talk about today.
I hope so.
So let's start. You have created, I guess, like a company out of initially your book, your famous book called Main Street Vegan, and you also have an academy now. So it'd be great to know about those two things before we touch on your background, actually.
Sure. Well, in 2011, December 2010, excuse me, I went to a PETA fundraiser and they showed videos. Now, I had already been vegan for close to 30 years at that time. But for some reason, when I saw those images, I think they just fell on a very open heart. And all I wanted to do was write Ingrid Newkirk a check for $100,000, but it would have bounced. So in the subway here in New York City on the way home, I was talking to God, and I'm one of those people who says things like talking to God. Why can't I give her $100,000? And the response was, well, you can do something else. Your next book needs to be called Main Street Vegan. It needs to have 40 short chapters, a recipe at the end of each one, and it needs to be geared to the young woman that you were back in Wheaton, Illinois in the 1980s when you went vegan. And so it was almost like I was taking dictation, and I knew that that was indeed what I was supposed to do. So during the course of that, some rather remarkable things transpired. For one thing, when Tarcher Penguin had taken the book on, and people who aren't familiar with publishing don't know that with nonfiction books, you don't write the book, you write a proposal. That's what the publisher buys. And then you work with the publisher to do the book so that it really is a co-creation. So when I spoke with my editor for the first time, she said, "Oh, we're happy to have you, happy to have the book, but we hate Main Street." And she thought it sounded rather right wing and conservative and things like that. And so they'd bought the book, it was theirs. We had to do the title that they wanted. So I kept trying to think of a title and I couldn't think of one. And it was really discouraging me and kind of slowing me down in the writing process. And one sunny Saturday, my husband and I are walking up Broadway and we see somebody so famous that you could recognize him from the back. And that was the filmmaker Michael Moore. Now, he had liked one of my earlier books. I'd written a weight loss book that he had gotten some good from. And so I gave my card to the woman who was with him and went on up the street. And in a few seconds, I hear Victoria. And there's Michael Moore following us up the street. And after exchanging pleasantries, he said, well, we need to talk. We need to talk about food. So we started having these conversations by phone. And in one of them, I just happened to mention the book I'm writing is supposed to be called Main Street Vegan, but the publisher hates Main Street. And he said, "Oh, they're wrong. Let me talk to them."
Oh,
So
awesome.
we had a three-way call with a Academy Award winner and my editor and me, and he convinced her, she convinced the higher ups. And that's how Main Street Vegan happened. Now, I know a lot of your listeners are in the UK, and I know you've got the high street, but it's a different concept because in the US, Main Street is just everybody, because every city, every town, even New York City and Brooklyn has a Main Street. I mean, you can't have a US town without Main Street. And it just kind of means everybody all together. We may not agree on everything, but we got this Main Street thing going on. And even then, even years back before we were in this thing now where people are talking about how Americans can't agree on anything, there were certainly the very strong signs that was happening. And veganism, we always think of as something that's going to pull people further apart, but I actually believe that it's something that could draw people together. So the book happened and it had that name. And once my editor called and said, yes, it's going to be Main Street Vegan, it was like those bubbles in the comic books that just pop up. And it was like, there needs to be a Main Street Vegan radio show. I think I wasn't even thinking podcast because it was, 2011. And then there needs to be Main Street Vegan production so that you can help midwife some of these wonderful documentaries and get them out into the world. And there needs to be Main Street Vegan Academy, training and certifying vegan lifestyle coaches and educators. And all this was just like, okay, let's do this. Now, I had never been in business. I have been a writer my entire life. I started out writing for teen magazines, and then I've written books. To date, I have 13 books. And so the idea that I would start this school and actually work with people and do something in the world of business was not anything that I thought would come into my life. But veganism does that to you. You open yourself to, okay, I want to get this message out, and you just show up for what you need to do. So I am showing up to be in business as well as being a writer and a speaker.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And just going back to the time when you were on that call with Michael Moore, what was the main thing he did to convince the publisher there to use that name?
Yeah, he explained to her that all Americans, at least, think that they are Main Street. So you could talk to somebody who's very conservative or somebody who's very liberal. They believe that the values that they hold are the values that come from the best that this country has to offer. And so if you can bring people together even though we might see it differently, we come from this fount of good, it's going to work. And certainly for Main Street Vegan, it has.
Going towards now the content that you create, can you tell me a little bit more about the Academy and
Sure.
what you do? And I guess a lot of it is now remote versus in person.
Yes, it started out in person, and I was very connected to the idea that it was in person because that is something unique. Most of the vegan training programs are online. And so ours was put out into the world as you come to New York City, which really is kind of Disneyland for vegans. There's so much great vegan stuff going on here. I don't know how much of it is still going to be here when COVID ends, but certainly it has traditionally been a wonderful place so that we can add on delightful field trips in addition to the coursework. So we would go to a raw food market, an Indian spice shop, a vegan shoe store, a vegan and hypoallergenic bakery, a vegan chocolate shop, a little herb store, and all these just amazing places. And people have come so far from 29 countries and all over the US. And so people that have just never had the idea that there are, these wonderful kinds of business opportunities that one could aspire to. So we started in 2012, bringing people here to New York, and then our wonderful presenters would come to us. So we cover a 3-tier program: vegan principles, communication principles, and business principles. So that first we want everybody to know, and they have to read several books and do some other prerequisites to get here. But when they're here, we want to be sure that they have the whole scope of what it is to be vegan, because if we're going out into the world as experts on this, you need to understand about animal rights and animal law and the history of vegetarianism. So many people think it started in 1980 with PETA, and to really, take that back through Eastern and Western civilization, and then to learn about the health aspects, about nutrition, somewhat in depth, vegan fashion, and just so we go through the solid vegan foundation, and then you've got all this information. What are you going to do with it? So we have classes on how to do one-on-one coaching, how to address groups, how to be online as a presence, how to work with mixed and blended families. These families where one person's vegan and one isn't, and that sort of thing. And then we get into business principles about branding and marketing and setting yourself apart and just understanding really what vegan business is. And for me, someone who went vegan in 1983, it's still an oxymoron, vegan business. And I'm always like, there's vegan business? Yeah, there is a vegan business. And to understand what's going on out there and to understand, how the big kids play and then how somebody who's just starting out as a solopreneur can find their way in that. And now, like you said, we are on Zoom, which is such a wonderful platform because when I had my prejudices against online courses, it was because the only ones I'd taken were prepackaged. And I'm just listening to something that happened a long time ago. And I think it's a little bit like the Quakers, the Society of Friends, where their worship service is that everybody sits until somebody feels inspired to speak. So it's always fresh and it's always new. And there's something about doing something live, like you and I are talking live right now. We're saying something that maybe we've never said before or in a way that we've never said it before, and it's alive and magical and special. And so that's what we bring now to the Zoom courses. And I still hope we're going to have an in-person course next fall in New York City. So that is planned with fingers crossed.
So thinking about your students who have now graduated, what sort of success stories have they had since graduating from your course?
Some rather dazzling ones. And what's interesting to me is that when the program started, all I could see was coaching. And the certification is Vegan Lifestyle Coach and Educator. And yet, what has happened from the very first class in 2012 and continuing is that some people do one-on-one coaching, some people do speaking, some people have written books for major publishers, and many have started businesses. So we have, for example, Kat Mendenhall in Dallas, Texas, has a cowboy boot company that's all vegan and eco-friendly and dazzling boots. They're custom boots. They're just wonderful. And then J.L. Fields is out in Colorado. She has a cooking academy, and she's become a cookbook maven. I think she's written 5 or 6, and she also does consulting for vegan food companies. We have graduates who have started a bodega, a little convenience store, all vegan in Philadelphia called V Marks the Shop. We have Bon Mo ice cream in Mexico City from one of our graduates. We have Riverdale Cheese here in Manhattan, and she manufactures cheese and has a beautiful fromagerie. So we just have people out there doing all kinds of things, and the inspiration and the kickoff is here. And we do have so many amazing faculty members that just make it magical. Joshua Katcher is a wonderful fashion designer. Dr. Robert Ostfeld is a cardiologist, and the Our Hen House ladies, Jasmine Singer, who's with Veg News, and Marianne Sullivan, who's a wonderful animal rights attorney and animal law professor, all come and bring their magic, and then we stay connected. I think that's another thing. And for anybody doing any work in this world, to just keep connected, even if it's just a voice message or a little LinkedIn or whatever it is, to let people know, just like I said earlier, that I became vegan because Jay and Freya Dinshaw never gave up on me. And I think a lot of vegan businesses happen because those around the person who wants to start the business don't give up, even when it's difficult.
And let's go back now to your early years. So I think you were fascinated about yoga when you were around 17.
Yes.
And you previously said to me that yoga also comes with it, that you have to be, it's said to be vegetarian, I think at the time. And then was it 18 that you went to become a pescatarian then afterwards? Or
Yeah.
what was the timeline there?
Sure. Well, I've always been fascinated by spirituality from as long as I can remember. And I did have a wonderful nanny who raised me with a lot of ideas for which I am forever grateful. And she was also the first person to tell me that there were vegetarians in the world. And this is Kansas City, Missouri, the very middle of the United States in the 1950s. And Kansas City at that time was actually known for stockyards. Our stockyards were second to Chicago's. And so I'd never heard of vegetarians. I didn't know one, but I came home from school with the 4 food groups, which at that time were the gold standard for nutrition. But basically, it implied that half of what you eat needs to come from animals. And she was not herself vegetarian, but she was in a church where it was suggested. And so she was aware of this. And she said, humph. She didn't want the government to tell her what to do. She said, there are people who are called vegetarians and they eat no meat. And I could take you to a restaurant and get you a burger made out of peanuts, and you'd think you were having beef. And I was 5 years old, and I just remember, wow, people who don't eat meat, burgers made out of peanuts? There is so much to learn, and I don't think I'm going to learn most of it in school. So that seed was planted. I tried to be vegetarian when I was 13 and didn't know what I was doing, and ultimately got hungry and stopped. But yeah, at 17, I was reading about yoga, and 18, I went pescatarian because I was living in England where it was much easier to be vegetarian. And I would have been vegetarian, except that I was in Weight Watchers. I had had a history of overeating, overweight, and found Weight Watchers in London. And at that time, everybody had to be on the same food program. And part of that was fish 5 times a week. And they had me so scared that if I didn't eat fish, I would just, become morbidly obese. And the following year, when I was back in the States, I did go completely vegetarian. And guess what? I gained a huge amount of weight. And I think it was because I believed I was supposed to. I wasn't eating the magical fish. So, of course, I had to get heavy. It wasn't from being vegetarian. It was because I reverted to binge eating. So I heard about veganism a couple of years after that and found the American Vegan Society, Freya Dinshaw and her husband, the late Jay Dinshaw. And they were so inspiring to me. And I so wanted to be vegan, but it was really difficult with my eating disorder. So I'd be vegan for a while, and then I would fall off, and then I would crawl back on. And yet Jay and Freya never gave up on me. They never, ever treated me like a failure. They treated me like a vegan to the point that eventually I had to become one because they held this very strong and powerful view for me. So it took me several years. There was lots of slipping and sliding from vegan to vegetarian. Although when I was vegan at that time, in those years in my 20s, I thought I was vegan. I just didn't know that it was going to be temporary. But I got very involved in the movement, and I spoke at the International Vegetarian Union World Congress in Orono, Maine in 1975. And it was one of these great stories where Dr. Ethel Thurston, the woman who was supposed to do the Beauty Without Cruelty fashion show at this huge conference, was not able to attend at the last minute. And so Jay called on me to do the fashion show. And that meant speaking for 2,200 people. And I was just initiated at that time. And I've been doing this work ever since.
So when you went vegan, did that also help you recover from your eating disorder that you had?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful marriage. And I write about this in my book, The Love Powered Diet. I had discovered Overeaters Anonymous prior to this, but I had been off and on with that, just like I'd been off and on with veganism. And also I had given birth to my daughter, and I really wanted to raise her vegan. And so the combination of this great desire to raise a vegan child and the fact that I committed to the 12-step program in Overeaters Anonymous, gave me the ability finally to be vegan consistently. And not that I never had a lapse, not that I never put half and half in coffee at a restaurant, because I did. But I do date my vegan date to November of 1983, and do not regret that for 1 minute. In terms of the weight, it all just fell off, 60 pounds. And it's something I know nowadays, we have a lot of people talking about, just don't talk to me about losing weight. I accept my body the way it is. It's beautiful. It's fine. It's mine. I completely celebrate that. For me, it was about being in bondage to these eating binges. And so it's liberation for me. And the peace that has come from not indulging in an addiction and knowing that I live each day without harming other beings is just the most beautiful blessing. And it's gone on for so long. And in the world of weight loss, recidivism is just runs rampant, and people consider themselves successful, or they consider a diet successful if it lasts for a year or 2 years. And for me, it's been over 36 years, going on 37 years. So yeah, it's a good thing. And I'm very grateful.
Congratulations. It's a very long time. And did you end up raising your daughter vegan?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she's so sweet. Oh my gosh, it's so wonderful, these vegan children. I'm also in contact with Vegan Evan, who's a kind of vegan online celebrity, and he actually came with his mother, and they took the Main Street Vegan Academy course. I think he's 10 now, and just on fire for veganism, and so articulate. And
Yeah.
so raising my daughter as a vegan was really an adventure. So we're talking the 1980s and 90s, most of the time in Kansas City. And we just found our way. I mean, we didn't know other vegans locally, but we knew some vegetarians. We knew a Sikh family that were vegetarian, and they were good vegetarians. They were egg-free vegetarians. So that's close. And everybody, all of our friends, were very respectful of this. I think sometimes parents are so afraid their children are going to be ostracized, but we understand, some kids take piano lessons, and some kids take Hebrew classes, and some kids are vegan. And I mean, hopefully in time, all kids will be vegan, and everybody. But for now, it's like, yeah, some kids are vegan. We can handle that.
Yeah, exactly.
So I didn't have any trouble. I didn't have any trouble with pediatricians. I did have one acupuncturist. I remember kind of get on my daughter, because she has some bronchial issues, which are completely hereditary. My mother had them, I had them. And, I know veganism is great for that. And she probably would have been in worse shape had she been consuming dairy. But I do recall this acupuncturist, saying to her, if you weren't on this extreme diet, you wouldn't have these problems. And oh, my mother bear came out then, because obviously the extreme diet was my doing and not hers. And yet she was in from the very, very beginning. And I always said things like, Adair, if you ever feel like you need to try some of these other foods, it's okay. Don't feel like you have to hide it or anything. And she would always say to me, why would I want to do a thing like that? Who do you think I am?
Yeah.
So it's very cool. And she is vegan to this day.
Yeah, and today, interestingly, she's a stunt woman, and it'd be really interesting to know, especially from your work that you've done on nutrition. What sort of things does she have now, when, especially that is very physically exhausting?
Yeah.
I guess her recovery time needs to be, as quick as possible, so she can get onto the next shoot.
Yeah. And, it reminds me a little bit, I had a pro wrestler on my podcast a few years ago, Austin Aries. He's retired from wrestling now. Very good idea, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah.
But I asked him about his workout, And he said, well, I have a trainer and we work around my injuries. So when you're doing something like that, and to a lesser degree, what my daughter does as a stunt performer and an aerialist, there's a lot of just, getting hurt and having to recover from that continually. So she has nothing to compare it to because she's not had animal products in her life. But yeah, she does extremely well. She's petite, and she's just powerful. I was teasing her once and said, I better not bump into you, Adair. I would break something, because she's solid muscle, and that is all vegan muscle.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? You also interviewed John Sully, the basketball
Yes.
player.
Yeah.
He's been played for many teams, including the Chicago Bulls. So yeah, it's just like wrestler, stunt performer, basketball. We need more of these, athletes to come out
Yeah.
and veganism.
Well, it's happening fast and furious. I mean, and it's wonderful to see. And they were eating meat and animal products, so they can say this is the difference. This is how it was, and this is how it is now.
Yeah,
So yeah, they're terrific.
yeah. And you also appeared on Oprah.
Yeah.
So how was that experience? And
Ooh, it was great. It happened twice, actually. And both times were really miraculous, because when she had her daily television show, if you were someone who wrote nonfiction books, it was as if being on Oprah was a gate through which you had to pass to be vetted, to
yeah,
be a really respected author.
like I guess the gold standard when you
Yeah.
went to the book club, I guess.
Well, yes. Now that was for fiction. So being nonfiction, it was just, to be a guest. But
Okay.
I wanted this very, very much, to the point that when my husband and I, this is a second marriage, so we were dating like 22, 23 years ago, and he said to me once, Is it normal that you want to be on Oprah this much?"
Yeah.
And it's just like, yeah, it's a step, to get through. So the first time they actually came to my house in Kansas City, I had written a book called Shelter for the Spirit, which is about making your environment nurture your soul. And they needed something for their end segment. They used to have a thing called Remembering Your Spirit that was about 3 minutes at the end. So they sent a field producer and a camera crew who spent 9 hours at my house, and just did this beautiful, beautiful piece about home and the beauty and sanctity of that. And then about 3 years later, I had a book called Lit from Within, which is about bringing out your inner beauty. And they did a show called Take the Vanity Challenge, where they took the makeup away from 3 women who considered themselves addicted to makeup for, I believe it was 21 days. And so I actually, for that one, got to go to Chicago and be in the Sanctum Sanctorum. And people say, well, what was Oprah like? And to me, she is like someone who has created very necessary and very strong boundaries. It was as if, there's this aura around her that you just wouldn't cross. And I find this so interesting as a life lesson for people who want to go out and change the world. And so often, we don't want to stop. We want to stay up all night. We don't want to have any recreation. We feel like if I have fun, then it's an insult to the animals who are suffering, and, all these things. And burnout is so common. And Oprah, being who she was and who she is, with that kind of presence, she really learned how to protect herself. And I think that's something animal activists could draw on.
Yeah, and she has so much, so many good speakers that come on, and she was doing this Super Soul Sunday, I think, was one of a few episodes that I think I've seen in the past. So yeah, she's done a lot to look at things like, spirituality, nutrition, and there's so many topics that she addresses, doesn't she?
Yeah, yeah, and I think she'll be vegan someday.
Hopefully.
You
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
it's difficult, I think, for anyone, and I can say this as someone who also has been through this. Food issues are really tough, and I think they change people, and they cause people to believe in limitations that they don't have. And so she's overcome everything else. So who knows? She might be vegan even as I speak. I hope so.
yeah. And so going back to the yoga side,
Yeah.
so you've been practicing yoga now for a very long time. How important is it that like anybody who's doing yoga also embraces veganism?
Well, it's very interesting to me because when I became involved in yoga so long ago, it was very unusual. It wasn't widely practiced at all in the West. It was something that you had to sort of ferret out. And I found my first teacher in London, 1968, and then I refound her. I was over there speaking for the Veg Fest UK a few years ago, and I'd never been able to find her in all those years since. And I thought perhaps, heaven forbid, she had passed away, but she was living on the continent. And so when I refound her, she was in her 90s, and she is now 94. And I took a class with her last year. I was in London for the premiere of A Prayer for Compassion, a beautiful film introducing veganism to people who identify as religious or spiritual. And I'm on the production team for that. So I was there, and I
Yeah,
took Stella's class, and it was just such a lovely thing. And so for me, yoga is very personal and very inward. You know, it's almost like talking with someone about their religion or about some really guiding principle of a person's life. And I understand now it has become something else as well. Real yoga has not lost itself, just like these wonderful mystical underpinnings of all the religions. You know, people can do all kinds of strange things around them, but that core of truth is what holds them together. And I believe that so strongly about yoga. But now we have this yoga world, and I kind of am not in that. In fact, I very much am not in that. And yet now that I took a yoga teacher training program this summer during COVID, and I'm going to take an advanced course this winter. So I guess I'm getting more into the world of yoga. And it's interesting. I know that there are a lot of people from India or have Indian heritage who really don't like all of these. Like, one website I went to said that among the influences that have killed yoga is vegans and white women. And it's like, oh my gosh, that's me. Uh, but I don't think that I've done anything to kill yoga, because I have great respect for the teachings and the traditions. And so to circle back to answer your question, I believe that anybody who gets this sense of oneness has to look at how we're living with that reality. And none of us is perfect. I mean, just because I'm a vegan and I feel that I am one with animals, I'm also one with these people working in sweatshops. And I do my best not to buy clothing from countries where sweatshops are prevalent and all of that. But I'm not perfect at it at all. I'm a really good vegan, and I'm not a really good shopper, because sometimes it's just like I need some socks and I don't look at where they came from.
yeah,
So I don't think it's a judgmental thing. Oh my gosh, you do yoga and you're not vegan, oh, or you're not vegetarian. I mean, certainly yoga's history is vegetarian, not vegan. So
right.
that's another big leap that I think we're just looking at. In fact, in March, I'm going to be working with the Integral Yoga Institute here in New York, and with Holly Scotus, who founded Yoga is Vegan. She has a wonderful podcast, and she's just terrific, to talk about the awakening of yoga into veganism. So it's cool. There are lots of wonderful things going on. And yet I think for it to really impact a person's life, it's the getting up, practicing, meditating, breathing, eating, certainly vegetarian, ideally vegan, and 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 studying, the literature. There's so much wisdom there. So to me, that's yoga a lot more than Lululemon.
Yeah, for sure. And you also practice Ayurveda now in terms of the whole lifestyle, I guess, as well.
Yeah, there's so many great ways to be healthy as a vegan. And I have seen people do well. I've seen people heal from actual pathologies as macrobiotic, raw food, whole food, plant-based, no oil, and Ayurveda, which has oil. And
And also
I,
has ghee, right? So
well,
a lot
yeah,
of the medicines, when you're having the traditional form, they do
yes.
need to have ghee in it. And I always used to have these debates with those people who encourage that, saying, and their whole thing was that the medicine would, with the ghee would enter your bloodstream faster, and those various reasons they'll say to have it, but it's not something that I agreed with.
Yeah, and I think I learned something in 12 steps that I think applies to life, and that is take what you like and leave the rest. So, as a vegan, I love Dr. Michael Clapper's quotation where he says that the human body has no need for the flesh of animals, the eggs of chickens, or the milk of cows. And I believe that absolutely firmly. But just for sake of argument, let's say that ghee helps the medicine get into your bloodstream quicker. Well, what are we treating here? A snake bite? Are you going to die in 30 seconds if the medicine doesn't get in, quickly? So it's like, okay, let's just say that Ayurveda can only work 90% if I don't do ghee. I'm still going to do it because that makes me 90% healthier than if I weren't doing it. So I think it's just really important to be able to be an independent thinker and to go out into the world with the freedom to explore anything and everything that you want. When I was a new vegan and raising a vegan child, it looked as if there were going to be a lot of limitations. So, for example, my daughter took dance and she needed ballet shoes. And at that time, we had to order them from the UK. And now we have a wonderful Cynthia Rowley makes fabulous Cynthia King, not Cynthia Rowley, I'm sorry, does her wonderful ballet shoes, and there are other companies. But at that time, it was tough, but it wasn't insurmountable. You just looked until you found it. And something in Ayurveda that I was looking for recently, there is, for those who don't know Ayurvedic philosophy, one of the concepts is the idea of a rasayana, which is something that is a rejuvenative. This is something that's going to make you younger and juicier and all that. And so they have this kind of jelly that's made out of all these healing herbs and ghee and honey, and it's called Chyavanprash. And I'd only read about it, but it just seemed so magical. And I'd looked at lists of ingredients, and the animal products were always at the very end. So it wasn't like this is a big part of the thing, but I couldn't find it. And finally, online, just literally last week, I found some little company in Utah that has one that's vegan. And it's like, well, cool.
Yeah.
So now, maybe I'm up from 90% Ayurvedic benefit to 93.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we can highlight that company on the show notes if you like, if there's other people
Okay.
who find that. So that's awesome. And then could you talk about some of the other principles of Ayurveda that you follow?
Oh, sure. Ayurveda, it means the science of life. And it's very, very old. I mean, so much wisdom has come out of India for so long. It's just mind-boggling. The things that were understood by the ancient Indian rishis, just like the people in ancient China and Tibet who came up with their healing systems. But it's the idea of living in harmony with nature, which we're so far away from, most of us in the modern Western world. So Ayurveda has some very simple techniques that anybody can do that you can just adapt and bring into your life, and your life will be better even if you never do another Ayurvedic thing. So for example, something very simple is to get a little tongue scraper. They're silver or stainless steel or copper, and first thing in the morning, you just scrape off your tongue. So worst case scenario, you've just given yourself better breath. But in Ayurvedic teaching, that coating that forms on the tongue overnight, or if you've ever done fasting, you know, it just, you get argyle socks on your tongue. It's called ama, it's metabolic debris. And so you want to get rid of that. So you're helping the body detoxify. Very, very simple thing that you can do first thing in the morning.
Yeah,
Something
I've
else.
been doing it for years. So obviously our family heritage is Indian. So being
Absolutely.
brought up in a house, you're more likely to have one of those tongue scrapers.
Well, and that's, you know, just the fact that I'm even talking about this with you is very humbling, because obviously it's not my heritage, but I admire it and I
Yeah,
live it to the best of my ability.
yeah,
Something else that Ayurveda recommends, particularly in the colder months, or for someone of the vata body type. I don't know that you want to get into the body types. That gets a little bit more complicated, but suffice it to say, there are these three body types, and I'm just going to give you celebrities so that you can get a sense of what the body types are. Vata is Audrey Hepburn and Fred Astaire. Pitta, Venus and Serena Williams. And Kapha, Deepak Chopra, and Oprah Winfrey. So if you can just kind of imagine what these people look like, you get a sense of these kind of types. And you're not necessarily a pure vata, pitta, or kapha. You can be a mixture of two, or on rare occasions, a mixture of all three. And everybody has all three, but most people have either one or two very strongly in their constitution, and the other one not so much. But throughout your life, you're also influenced more by one of these than another. So childhood and young adulthood, you're more kapha, which means that you're just more moist. You know, we talk about the human body is 75% water. Well, you know, that's a child's body. You know, we kind of start to dry up over time, but children and young adults are more kapha. They tend to be strong. They tend to not get serious illnesses, generally speaking, but they're prone to allergies and colds and respiratory things because cough is very slow moving, and so the mucus, you know, can get stuck in that. And then pitta is midlife, and you're out in the world, and you're strong, and you're powerful, and you're doing things, and you're, you know, getting your degree, and you're buying your house, and you're having your family, and making your mark in the world. And so that's the, you know, strong, powerful time. And then physically, if you're out of balance as a pitta, you can end up with inflammatory conditions, skin breakouts, inflammatory arthritis, ulcers, that kind of hot kinds of conditions. And then vata, regardless of the body type you're born with, everybody is influenced, you know, through their lifetime. So in the kind of post-menopausal, post-andropausal years of life, everybody is more vata, which means your skin gets a little drier and thinner. You tend to get cold. I always wondered why old people all moved to Florida. And, you know, now that I'm 70, it's like, oh yeah, okay, I get it. And digestion, it slows and becomes weaker. So
I did. Did you just say you're 70?
I did.
Wow.
Yeah.
Look great for 70.
Oh, thank you. Well, and it's much, being 70 is so much better than I had anticipated. So I think it's good to be vegan, and it's good to do some of this other stuff. So anyway, all that as an intro to another little facet of the Ayurvedic daily routine, which again doesn't have to be daily, but it can be when you feel that you need it. And that is warm oil massage. You can do it in the morning and then take a shower. You can do it at night and take a bath, but it's where you heat oil. Sesame oil is the classic, and
Mm.
oftentimes that's infused with healing herbs, and you start at the top of your head and you just put this oil on yourself, and ideally you'll let it be on your body for 20 minutes. And so often I'll do that, and then I'll do my meditation, or it's also recommended that you do it and then you exercise and you get some sweat going so the oil really gets into you. And it's like in the winter, it's like having an extra layer. You go out into the cold and the wind, and especially if you're somebody like me who's very sensitive to cold, and it's just like your coat just got thicker. It's just better. And it's calming. It helps with sleep. It helps with digestion. So, these are very simple things that people can do at home. And then in terms of the food, um, Ayurveda is pretty open about food, although it's largely vegetarian because of being from India, which is largely vegetarian. And one of the things that Ayurveda just shines on is spices and the healing benefits of spices, which we now know in Western medicine. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
the turmeric and
especially.
cumin and ginger.
Right.
They're just really magical and healing.
Yeah, yeah, totally. So the earlier, I think you mentioned a prayer for compassion, and that's actually how I came across you because
Ah,
I watched I watched that documentary, and I think that was on it's on Amazon, isn't it? I think it is.
yes, it's on Amazon Prime and also on Vimeo.
Right. Okay. Awesome. And yeah, very good documentary. Are you working on it on any others right now?
Um, yes, but I don't think I'm free to talk about it.
Okay.
So ask me in 3 months.
Okay. No problem. We'll get you back, and you can talk about it then when you launch
Yeah. And I will say that Thomas Jackson, the filmmaker for A Prayer for Compassion, has been working for about a year and a half on his second feature-length documentary, which I'm not part of, and so I'm not really in on the particulars, but I think it has to do with applying compassionate principles to the spiritual life. So we'll see when maybe I'm backwards. Maybe it's applying spiritual principles to the compassionate life, but we'll see. He's terrific. He's out there doing a lot of good work in the world.
Yeah, and so you're also very spiritual in nature, and your upbringing, and you believe in things like reincarnation, etc. And there's always one photo that I used to see where by ISKCON, the Hare Krishna movement in one of the temples, where it would have like a life cycle of your spirit
Ooh.
moving from one animal to another animal, one human to a different human, etc. And you just like it's a beautiful picture. And you do then realize, oh, actually, yeah, we are very connected with animals, and I think the animals do also feel very connected, even more so to the earth, and probably are a lot more sensitive, according to the devastation that's been caused to their species. So when you think about sort of reincarnation, what you do in this life, karma, etc. How should people be living, especially the ones that you want to convince? If they've gone vegan now, but also to do it in a non sort of preachy way, from all your years of experience that you've been doing this.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really about doing the best we can each day. I think it's almost like the diet mentality of, well, next Monday. It's the same thing with our character and our soul and social justice and all that stuff. It's not like, well, next week I'm going to get really good at this stuff. It's okay, what can I show up for today? And I don't have to be perfect, don't have to set the world on fire. I just have to show up and do my very best. And I know we were talking prior to the interview that Main Street Vegan Academy is having a master class for graduates right now. And yesterday, one of the speakers was Dr. Yanklowitz, who actually, you will remember him from the film. He was the rabbi who had donated a kidney to a stranger.
Yeah.
So that just tells you what kind of guy this is. But he said this beautiful thing. He said, the way to ignite a vegan revolution is for vegans to be kind. And he also talked about asking himself every night, have I given more today than I've taken? And he went on to say, I'm a white male in America. So just that means I've just taken so much. There's no way I could give that much back. And I look at him with tremendous admiration. He donated a kidney. He and his wife have foster children as well as their biological children. He's vegan. He's doing all this great work in the world. And yet he's so humble and says he can never give back as much as he's been given. And so that's just a very simple attitude. You don't have to read scriptures or learn ancient languages or do anything to just practice that. And you don't even have to believe anything. And I think that especially in the vegan movement, there is some impatience with spirituality because a lot of people have used religious teachings to justify meat eating and animal cruelty. Well, religious teachings have been used to justify all kinds of awful things. I mean, scientific findings have been used to justify awful things. It's like it depends on what's in your heart, what you're going to take out into the world. So I think just simple, that we're all going to see the world differently. We're all going to have different worldviews, like you've talked about. But yeah, I do believe in reincarnation. I was brought up with it. It makes absolute perfect sense to me. I had an absolutely stunning past life regression one
Really?
time when
Wow.
this voice came out of me that sounded like the recordings of the suffragettes. And I'm sitting there hearing all this. I mean, it's my body. And yet it was like there were two of us. I don't know. It's very hard to describe, but I was supposedly the spinster daughter of a barrister living in London and died, interestingly enough, of the flu in 1919. So, so I do believe it. But my husband, who, when I met him, was just a very secular person. I joked that I had always only dated spiritual vegetarians, and it just often didn't work out. So I was, going to look for somebody with a real job and health insurance. And but over the years, he's become a very, very spiritual guy. He's actually finishing up at the One Spirit Interfaith Seminary. He's going to get his ordination as an interfaith pastor. He's started already a nonprofit, the Compassion Consortium, that will be kind of like a vegan spiritual community, kind of a place for people who aren't having their vegan needs met in their spiritual tradition, or those who've left a spiritual tradition. So he's cool, but reincarnation is just, can't go there, can't get it, can't grok that. And so that's good. We don't argue about it or anything. And if we could all go out into the world that way, like I hold this belief very strongly and I cherish it, and you hold a different one, that's okay. And as long as we're not hurting people, and I know it gets complicated because I know sometimes people hold beliefs that really do hurt others. Well, that's different. But most of them, it's just people think differently, even as vegans. We all had something different for breakfast this morning. Lots of oatmeal, but not 100%.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Great. So yeah, I want to thank you for coming on the show today. I spoke about a lot of things, and anything you want me to put up about your books or your academy, I can put it on the show notes.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So thanks again, and hopefully see you again once you've maybe launched your new documentary as well.
Oh, thank you so much. That's wonderful.
Bye for now.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Cheers. Bye.